I'm very grateful for the life and for the ministry of my dear sister, the Reverend Jackie Lewis, and for also her invitation to think with you all today around the subject of revolutionary love. Specifically, around the questions of where are we now, where do we need to be, and what do religious leaders and the faith community, what ought we be doing to help get us there, to help approximate revolutionary love. I am grateful for the work of this church and for the work of my very distinguished colleagues, these freedom fighters here who I'm honored to share in this conversation with. So, some of you may know that I am a theological ethicist by training. But what most people do not know about me is that I am also a horror movie buff. And it's not just scary movies. I love mysteries, thrillers. My spouse absolutely despises it. He's not into it at all. But I am drawn to scary movies and thriller fiction. And I've really been more recently trying to understand why that is the case. Why, I'm a preacher and I'm, a pastor and a teacher. Why do I like to, cuddle up on the couch on Friday nights and watch scary movies rather than, for instance, genre of film like romance or drama or even comedy, all of which, as a movie person, are good with me too. But it's the scary movie that really takes my attention. And I think that we all know that horror films are not typically known for being the finest works of art. They are not the finest works of cinematography. More often than not, in fact, the plot is bad, or at least unsophisticated. The videography, likewise, is nothing to write home about. The acting is generally questionable, to say the least. Horror films, thrillers, mystery, they can be overwhelmingly brutal, and you can always figure out, you can always see the trouble, right? Although you see it coming, it seems that no one else in the film can actually figure out until it's too late, right? And up until recently, all the black people die. And for those of us, how many of you saw Get Out? Right? So up until recently, all the black people died. For those of us who have seen Get Out, I'm sure we can admit it for ourselves that we thought that Chris was a goner when we heard those police sirens at the end of the film as he was kind of choking the life out of white supremacy. But with all of this taken together, I'm still left wondering why, as a theologian, why, as a lover of the gospel, a lover of sacred text, why I set myself up in my spare time, outside of my daily work of battling intersections of race and gender and class and sexual subordination, why do I set myself up to watch this crap? I'm telling you, I've been thinking about this for a while now, and it finally came to me as I thought about what I would talk with you all today. As I thought about what a revolutionary love conference might have to do with the thriller that I am thinking about watching tonight. What is the strand of continuity. How do these things fit together? And it finally came to me as I was sitting at my dining room table that in most thrillers, in most horror films, not all, but most, there's always a survivor. There's always somebody who, after having fought with monsters and confronted demons and battled with bad guys and dodged bullets and brutes and terror of all kinds, even if they are scarred and bruised and burned and frightened or limping, there is always a survivor. As a womanist theologian and ethicist, survival is the heartbeat of my work. And when I think about where we are right now, to be quite honest with you, nothing sophisticated emerges. In fact, the immediate responses that come to me when I'm confronted with this question are, in fact, the titles of horror films. When I ask myself the question that guides this first panel of the day, where are we? I think Apocalypse, Psycho, A Nightmare on Elm Street. I think Scream, The Purge, Fright Night, World War Z, Night of the Living Dead, Paranormal Activity. Deliver us from evil. In other words, what we are living through right now, it's so bad, it's so brutal, it's cast with such amateurish, incompetent actors in the lead, with so much obvious trouble all around, where black and brown people who sit at the intersections of other socially subordinate indicators, poor, women, queer, young, where black and brown people die first. This makes me feel like I'm in a bad horror film. It makes me feel like I'm being punked, that the camera crew is about to jump out at any moment. But what's even worse than this, what's even worse than thinking about all of this is knowing, and there is a difference between what you think and what you know. It's even worse knowing that for as much as such terror is the property of fantasy, the possession of hashtag Hollywood so white, it's also contiguous with flesh and blood. This monster, which is constituted by the hegemony of white male power, its supremacy, its nationalism, which has been nurtured in the bosom of white women, which has been coddled in the embrace of minoritized communities who hate themselves, in submission to the lie they have been told about themselves by the arbiters of power. This monster, this demon, this brute, this Leviathan, this evil is real. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, this evil is not a new resident in our nation. As a liberal white gaze that disappears blackness toward the end of privileging melodic composition would have us believe, black people have been dying in this nation since 1619. Everybody, Ben Carson, is not an immigrant. and recognition of such is not anti-immigrant, but it's the truth. It's truth of the fact that the city on a hill is not a myth or a legend, but it is a lie. We, Malcolm said, didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Black people have been crying out for revolution ever since they sang on plantations, "Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go." Black people have been crying out for revolution, crying out to the colored nations of the world like David Walker, crying out about the Southern horrors and the red record of lynching in the South like Ida B. Wells Barnett, crying out for the right to work like Asa Philip Randolph and Maxine Smith and Adam Clayton Powell Jr., crying out that God is a Negro, which did not start with James Cone, but with Henry McNeil Turner. This revolutionary call is not new. Therefore, to ask the question, how did we get here? How did we get to where the administration of our country, the administration of our local governments, our schools, and our churches is wielded by white terrorists, sometimes white terrorists in black or brown face, who proclaim that the white god of capitalist hyperacquisition is great. To understand how we got here requires us to mine the logics of genocide, slavery, and rapeability, and the ways in which such logics have informed the normative Christian project since the dawn of modernity. Asserting in Christ a bottom line where only certain bodies matter, typically white, typically male, typically land-owning and heterosexual in public. And that the rest of us don't matter. It was propagated biblically in this way: cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brethren. This is our nightmare. This is the everyday horror that we face in church, in academy, in society. Now, my work as an ethicist begins where problems start. This means that every day, my work begins with the problem of evil, or what womanist theologian, systematic theologian Joanne Terrell refers to in her classic text, Power in the Blood, as theodical intent. And perhaps this is why horror films make sense to me. Because in their insensibility, I know how really real it is. Yet even given the horror of the reality of our time, which is not new, I'm reminded why the survivor at the end of any decent horror film is so intriguing to me. And that's because a survivor indicates that there is still hope. It indicates that the beast can be stopped, even if momentarily. It indicates that somebody will make it, even if it's not me. So as it relates to the final question about us, I think that what we need to do is to produce, or to embrace rather, a survivalist mentality. One that is not based in utopic vision. Because as has already been indicated by my panelists, I'm not sure any of us know really what liberation and justice actually look like. I mean, if we were to talk about Tillich, we understand these things ontologically, and I'm not sure that being can actually be held in vision. But I will say a survivalist politics, a survivalist ethic that is rooted in a theology of hope that is not Moltmannian as it relates to the hope of the resurrection of the crucified, primarily because even though we may need to bear crosses, we don't need any more people dying on them. Jesus already paid it all. So we can throw Moltmann to the side. We don't need a theology of hope that is oriented to more of us dying, but one that is oriented to more of us surviving. Even if we in our human power can never perfect the love and the justice that we seek. Survival. So that as people of faith, we don't, like I'm going to do tonight, sit back in the comfort of our couch and watch as horror continues to unfold. But that we run toward the monster, knowing that even if we don't win, it might mean that someone else will survive. Thank you.